Rachel, in my experience, when people start to feel conviction about these issues and their heart is moved, they are overwhelmed by where to start and can then just get a bit stuck. What would your message be to Christians who are tuning into that call but don't know what to do with that?
I think the first thing is that we need to understand the difference between guilt and lament. So guilt is, oh my gosh, I feel so guilty. I'm driving the wrong car. I'm drinking water out of a plastic bottle. You know, it's all my fault. Lament is to say that communally we lament our impact on the planet. We lament the hurt that we are doing to our global neighbors. But lament brings together with it a cry for justice and a cry for action. Whereas guilt, I may do stuff out of guilt for a while, but then I burn out because I'm not getting my strength from anywhere. Whereas lament is it's a Christian coming together to bewail what we have done, to feel the pain of those who are hurting, but a commitment towards justice. And then the other thing which I find is quite helpful is to say to people, identify your heartbreak. Because we are so surrounded by all these terrible disasters. I mean, the United Nations talks about the three: the loss of biodiversity, the plastic pollution, and the climate change. And within each of those are multiple problems that we're facing. And so what is it that you personally, what breaks your heart when you read about it, when you see it on your screen? Because that is where the Spirit of God is touching you. So you may be a plastic warrior, or you may be the one who's fighting for the rights of endangered species, or you may be somebody who's saying, I'm going to support the church in Mozambique. Whatever it is that breaks your heart, that's where God is touching you, that's where the Spirit is touching you. And find out more about that situation, educate yourself, learn more about it, and then find other people who share that same passion. Find your tribe, find your group of people that you can work with together on that issue. Pray about it, work about it, put your resources into that issue, inspire other people, use your social networks to educate other people about it. But don't feel like yours is to sort out all the problems. You focus on where God is calling you, and you can find that by identifying your heartbeat. And then the other thing is, I find this quite an inspiring picture from a wonderful Christian climate scientist, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. And if you haven't heard about her, follow her. She's amazing. So she says that we all have this picture of climate change activism, and it's like we're pushing this enormous rock up this enormous mountain, and it's just getting harder and harder, and the more we push, the heavier it becomes. And she says that's the wrong picture. We are actually already at the top of the mountain, and the rock is beginning to roll. And what we need at this hand is every single hand onto that rock. The more people who become involved, the faster the rock will roll. Yes, we're coming to this climate change thing too late, but the boulder is beginning to roll down the hill. So at this point, every hand matters, every action matters. What is important is that you do take action. And by taking action, you generate hope, and the boulder will move faster and faster. We're already into that exponential curve of climate action and climate change. So let us put our hands onto the boulder and find what God is calling you to do. What is the actions that God is calling you to do?
And Katharine Hayhoe is such an amazing world leader in this space, a passionate Christian and climate scientist. And she reminds us of the power of conversation, that one of the most effective things we can do is talk about it in our networks and in our sphere of influence, and to tune in to those passions and, as we would say, our God-given stirrings. So that, I guess, leads me to a question around movements of change, of which we've both been part of really seeing the church as part of those global movements of change. And when we reflect back in history, whether it is the Clapham sect, and no one could imagine that the transatlantic slave trade would ever come to an end. It was so entrenched in the economic systems, but a small and committed group of Christians using their influence, their sphere of influence, in that case the British Parliament, through decades were able to create enormous change. When we think of our own sphere of influence and perhaps that wider shadow that we haven't maybe even noticed that we could influence, what can individuals do to respond that is meaningful and could be part of being change agents?
So I think as individuals, what I would say is as I mentioned earlier, first of all, develop a creation-based spirituality and a love for nature, for yourself and for your family. So make those choices. What are you going to do on the weekend? Where are you going to take your kids or your grandkids? Are you going to go out into nature, or are you going to sit in a shopping mall? Are you going to take a picnic, or are you going to go to McDonald's? Like, get them to fall in love with creation. It's interesting when you talk to people who are climate activists, and many of them will reflect back on the love for nature, that they went camping when they were kids, or so to spend more time in nature. And also for our churches, like if you're having a lay ministers retreat or a youth event, or consistently try and choose places where you can get out of the conference center into nature, where you're somewhere where you can connect. When you do your devotions, go sit outside, or we've got wonderful apps now. We can take our cell phone and sit under a tree and have our morning devotion in nature. So to try and develop a spirituality which is connecting more with nature. And then the different actions that you can take. Obviously, it's very important that we live as simply as we can, recognizing the impact of our personal choices, whether it is our electricity use, whether it's fast fashions. We all have so many ridiculous numbers of clothes in our cupboards, and the impact that is making in terms of workers' rights, in terms of the impact on environment, our food choices. So there's lots of choices that we can make, but we must always remember that many people don't know, but the word carbon footprint was invented by BP. And so the fossil fuel companies are trying to put the blame for climate change on individuals. And actually we need to take our personal actions and push back on the fossil fuel companies. So what are the actions that we can take to push back on fossil fuel companies to speed up the transition towards renewables? Because our personal actions aren't enough. They're important, but they're not enough. And what we need to be doing is to be putting as much pressure on possible as the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies. So you can do things like look at your pension scheme. Where is your pension invested? Speak to your financial advisor. And you may find that the financial advisor got lots of other options for you. Where is your church putting their money? The Church of England has just recently, after many years of many people campaigning, divested, taking their money out of fossil fuels. So that was a campaign that many individual Christians were involved in, to say, we don't feel that it is now moral for our church to be getting profit from fossil fuels. You made the very good parallel with slavery. For many years the Church of England was making profit from slavery, and people thought it was quite fine because we're using the profit for good things. And it's the same thing now with fossil fuels. We have seen the damage that they are doing, particularly to the poorest of the poor. And so we have to recognize that it is actually no longer moral to make a profit from fossil fuels. So how do we take our money out? How do we use the power of our money to begin that shift? How do we vote? You guys did that quite effectively. How do we use our political power? How do we use our finances? And what are our individual actions that we can take as well?
It certainly has been documented that if we all lived like an Australian, it would take 3 planets to sustain us. So there are things we can do in our sphere of influence and our lifestyle. And as you said, Rachel, lifestyles change alone won't solve these issues, but actually can make a really significant difference, because how we choose to behave as a consumer is heard by corporations that have a huge influence and ability to be part of the solution. How we vote in a democracy for those that are seeking the future of our planet and the well-being of our fellow people, makes a big difference. And that is not a left or right issue. That is about how different parties or individual candidates develop policies, and they need to hear from those electorates what is on the heart of the people in their electorate. So
I think, on that one, I think often countries become quite polarised in terms of the political parties. And there's a pastor in Washington, D.C., who I think speaks really helpfully about this, called Jim Wallace. And he says in Washington, D.C., obviously that's where all the politicians hang out, and he says, you can identify the politicians because they've got wet fingers. So a politician will wet their finger and then see which way the wind is going, and then they'll decide on what their politicians are. So as Christians, he says, ours is not necessarily to change the politicians, ours is to change the wind. And then the politicians will change because we are changing the wind. So no, we can do that.
And I've seen that in Australia, that political cover that our politicians need from us if they're going to, whether it's be generous with a foreign aid budget, whether it is to make choices that have environmental integrity, they need the backing of ordinary people. But certainly whether it's our transport, our food system, our consumption of clothes and other sort of consumables, there are places we can start. So over to you, what is one faithful change you could make in your lifestyle that could make a difference? And how could you take a worshipful posture in making that change? So take some time to reflect and to write it down. Think of it like writing yourself a letter that in 30 days' time you will receive. And what will it say? And will you have made some progress? Will you have learnt a bit more about the issue or what you could do? Will you have changed your habits? So take one action to get started that you feel prompted to do, that you could make a change in your life.